The morning sun cast long shadows across the savanna as Koru crouched behind a cluster of thorn bushes, his powerful shoulders tense with anticipation. His deep-set eyes, shadowed by heavy brows, tracked the solitary figure moving through the dry grassland below. The lone female had been scavenging in his band's territory for 3 days now, always careful to avoid direct contact, always watchful. Koru's thick fingers closed around the smooth stone in his hide pouch. The quartz crystal caught fragments of sunlight, sending tiny rainbows dancing across his calloused palm. He had found it seasons ago in the riverbed during the great rains, and since then it had brought his hunter-gatherer band good fortune. But now, watching the female's careful movements as she dug for roots, he felt an unfamiliar stirring in his chest. The female was unlike any he had seen. Where most females of their kind were slight and quick, she possessed the build of a seasoned hunter. Broad shoulders, thick limbs corded with muscle, hands that could crush bone. Her matted hair hung in dark tangles around a face marked by countless sun seasons, and even from this distance, Koru could see the network of scars that decorated her arms and legs like badges of survival. She moved with the fluid caution of one who had learned to trust no one. Every few moments, she would pause in her foraging, her head snapping up to scan the horizon, nostrils flaring to catch any threatening scent on the wind. Her isolation was evident in every gesture, the way she hoarded each discovered tuber close to her body, the manner in which she constantly checked escape routes, the hollow look in her eyes that spoke of too many nights spent alone under hostile stars. Koru's own band had been watching her for days, debating among themselves. Gakko, his hunting partner, insisted she was dangerous. A lone female meant trouble, meant she had been cast out for good reason. But Ulu, the eldest female and keeper of their fire, had seen something different in the stranger's movements. "She knows the plants," Ulu had whispered that morning, her weathered hands gesturing toward the distant figure. "See how she chooses. She knows which roots heal, which leaves cure fever. We could learn." Now as Koru observed the female extract a particularly stubborn root from the hard-packed earth, he saw what Ulu meant. The stranger's knowledge was evident in her efficiency, in the way she seemed to read the landscape like other members of their species' red faces. She was not just surviving, she was thriving in conditions that would have killed most others within days. The wind shifted, carrying with it the acrid scent of the dry season and something else, the musk of a predator. Koru's head jerked toward the ridge to the east, where a spotted hyena emerged from behind a boulder, its yellow eyes fixed on the foraging female. She had not yet noticed the danger, too focused on her task to catch the threat creeping closer with each passing moment. Koru's hand instinctively moved to the bone-tipped spear at his side, but he hesitated. Helping her would reveal his presence, might drive her away forever. Yet watching her die would mean losing something valuable, not just her knowledge, but the strange pull he felt whenever he glimpsed her solitary figure against the endless savanna. The female finally sensed the predator's approach. Her head snapped up, and for a brief instant her eyes met Koru's across the distance. In that moment he saw not fear, but a calculating intelligence that reminded him of his own reflection in still water. She had known he was there all along. Without breaking eye contact, she slowly reached for a sharp rock beside her knee. The hyena crept closer, its powerful jaws already anticipating the meal. The female's muscles coiled like those of a great cat preparing to strike, her scarred hands steady despite the mortal danger approaching from behind. Koru made his choice. Rising from his hiding place, he let out a deep, booming call that echoed across the savanna. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something that belonged to the dawn of their kind. The hyena's head whipped toward the sound, its predatory focus shattered. In that instant of distraction, the female struck, her rock finding its mark against the creature's skull with a wet crack that sent it yelping back toward the ridge. She stood slowly, her chest heaving, dark eyes never leaving Koru's face as he descended from his hiding spot. 20 paces separated them now, close enough to see the intelligence burning in her gaze, far enough to flee if this encounter turned deadly. Neither moved for long heartbeats, two apex predators taking the measure of each other beneath the pitiless morning sun. Koru reached into his pouch and withdrew the crystal, holding it up so the light caught its faceted surface. Even from this distance, he could see her eyes widen slightly at the sight of the precious stone. It was an offering, a gesture of respect from one survivor to another. "Food," he called out in the guttural language of their people, his voice carrying clearly across the gap between them. "You give, I give this." The female tilted her head, studying both him and the glittering stone with the same intensity she had used to read the landscape moments before. The silence stretched between them like a taut sinew, pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. Nara's weathered hands trembled slightly as she stared at the crystal in the male's grasp. The stone's brilliance awakened memories she had buried deep, memories of her former band, of the last time someone had offered her a gift instead of bared teeth and hostile growls. She had been Thok's female then, second only to the alpha female in status within their hunter-gatherer band. Thok had been a formidable hunter, his spear arm strong, his knowledge of animal behavior unmatched among their people, but strength in the hunt did not always translate to wisdom in leadership, and when the great drought came, his decisions had cost them dearly. The crystal caught another ray of sunlight, sending sparkles across the dry grass between her and this new male. Koru, she had heard his band call him during her careful observations. He was different from Thok, broader through the shoulders with eyes that seemed to weigh and measure rather than simply react. Where Thok had been quick to anger, this one appeared to think before acting. "Why?" she called back, her voice hoarse from months of speaking only to herself. The word came out more as a growl than speech, her vocal cords unused to communication with others of her kind. Koru took a careful step forward, still holding the crystal aloft. His movements were deliberate, non-threatening, like approaching a wounded animal that might flee or attack without warning. "You know plants, roots, healing leaves." His words came in the clipped, essential speech of their people, each syllable carrying weight. "My band? We lose knowledge, need to learn." A bitter laugh escaped Nara's throat. Knowledge. Always it came back to knowledge. Her former band had valued her understanding of which berries could ease the pain of childbirth, which bark could reduce fever, which roots could fill an empty belly when game was scarce. But knowledge alone had not been enough to save them when the rivers dried up and the herds moved beyond their reach. She remembered the final confrontation with Thok's second-in-command, Drak, a younger male whose ambitions had grown as large as his muscles during that terrible dry season. When the band had split into factions, when accusations of hoarding water had flown like spears in the darkness, Nara had found herself caught between loyalty to Thok and the growing certainty that his leadership would doom them all. The choice had been made for her when Drak challenged Thok for leadership and lost, but not before delivering a wound that festered in the heat, slowly poisoning the alpha male's blood. As Thok weakened and died, Nara had found herself blamed for his death by those who whispered that her healing knowledge should have saved him. The truth, that some wounds go too deep for any plant medicine to heal, had meant nothing to grief-stricken band members looking for someone to blame. "You have females," Nara observed, nodding toward the distant smoke that marked Koru's camp. "Why need another?" Koru's expression shifted, something almost like pain flickering across his heavy features. "My female, taken by spotted fever 2 seasons past. Our healer woman grows old, forgets the old ways. You," he paused, seeming to search for words in their limited language. "You strong, survive alone. That takes knowledge we need." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Most males spoke in boasts and threats, establishing dominance through volume and aggression. This one simply stated facts, acknowledging weaknesses in his band that most alphas would die before admitting. Nara's gaze drifted past Koru to the ridge, where the hyena had disappeared. Soon the scavenger would return with others of its kind, drawn by the scent of blood from its wounded head. This place would become dangerous before the sun reached its peak, and she would need to move deeper into disputed territory to find safety. The thought of another night spent alone, listening to the hunting calls of predators while huddled around a meager fire, sent an unwelcome chill through her despite the growing heat of the day. "Your band accepts lone female?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Lone females were viewed with suspicion by established groups. They represented disruption to carefully maintained hierarchies, potential mates who might steal males from existing females, or worse, carriers of curses that had driven them from their original bands. Koru's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "Some fear," he admitted finally, "but I lead hunting. My word carries weight. Ulu, our firekeeper, speaks for accepting you. Others," he shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both uncertainty and determination. The crystal continued to catch the light, its faceted surface throwing rainbows that reminded Nara of the way sunlight looked when filtered through morning mist over water. It was beautiful, but beauty held little value in their harsh world. The real question was what accepting it would mean, Not just the stone itself, but the obligations and expectations that would come with it. She studied Koru's face, reading the lines of stress around his eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of responsibilities weighing heavily on broad shoulders. He was asking her to trust him, to place her survival in the hands of a band that might reject her, to give up the hard-won independence that had kept her alive through countless dangers. But independence had its own costs. Her stomach cramped with hunger despite the roots she had gathered, and her water supply would not last another day under the merciless sun. More than that, she could feel something vital withering inside her, some essentially human need for connection that solitude could not fulfill, no matter how strong her will to survive. "Food first," she said finally, her decision made with the same swift certainty that had saved her from the hyena's jaws. "Then we talk about shiny stones." Koru's shoulders relaxed visibly, though his grip on the crystal remained firm. The negotiation had begun. Koru reached into the hide pouch at his waist, his movements slow and deliberate under Nara's watchful gaze. The dried meat he withdrew was precious, strips of antelope that his band had carefully preserved during their last successful hunt. In normal circumstances, such food would never be shared with an outsider, but these were not normal circumstances. He placed 3 strips on a flat rock midway between them, then stepped back to a respectful distance. The gesture was more than simple courtesy. It was an acknowledgement of her strength and a demonstration that he understood the delicate nature of their negotiation. To approach closer without invitation would be seen as aggression, potentially ending any chance of alliance before it could begin. Nara studied the offering with the same intensity she had given the crystal. Her nostrils flared, detecting the subtle sense that told her about the meat's quality and freshness. It was good food, properly dried, free from the taint of rot that could mean death in their harsh world. More importantly, it was food freely given rather than fought over or stolen, a luxury she had not experienced in many moons. She moved toward the rock with fluid caution, never taking her eyes off Koru as she reached for the first strip. The meat was tough but flavorful, requiring strong jaws to break down the fibers. As she chewed, she felt some of the constant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. When had she last eaten meat? Weeks, perhaps longer. Her diet of roots, berries, and the occasional small lizard or insect had kept her alive, but left her body crying out for the strength that only flesh could provide. "How you hunt well," she said between bites, the words coming easier now that her throat was no longer parched from thirst and constant vigilance. Koru nodded toward the distant mountains where storm clouds were beginning to gather. "Rain comes soon. Then herds return to waterholes. Good hunting season ahead." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "Better hunting with knowledge of where animals drink, which plants they eat when sick." It was a subtle reference to her expertise, and Nara appreciated that he did not push too hard. Many males would have immediately demanded to know everything she had learned during her seasons of solitude, treating her knowledge as spoils of war to be claimed rather than wisdom to be respected. She reached for the second strip of meat, this time allowing herself to truly taste it rather than simply consuming fuel for survival. "You're females. They accept males' choice in new member." The question cut to the heart of band politics, and Koru's expression grew thoughtful. "Ulu has much influence. She remembers the old times before the Great Drought, says bands grow strong through accepting worthy individuals, not through turning away those with valuable knowledge. And others? Mira leads the gathering teams. Young but strong-willed. She questions all new things." Koru's voice carried a note of frustration that suggested previous conflicts. "Has 2 children. Fears for their safety if outsiders bring danger." Nara understood. A mother with young ones would naturally view any change as potential threat to her offspring's survival. It was an instinct as old as their species, and not one easily overcome through reason or persuasion. "Children need healing knowledge," Nara observed. "Young ones get sick, injured, fall from trees, eat wrong plants." She had seen it countless times in her former band, the desperate panic of parents watching their children suffer from ailments they could not understand or treat. "Truth," Koru agreed, his heavy features creasing with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Mira's youngest, son named Bok, always finding trouble. Last moon, ate berries that made him sick for many days. Ulu's knowledge limited with children's ailments." The third strip of meat was the best, tender despite its preservation, seasoned with herbs that spoke of sophisticated food preparation techniques. As Nara chewed, she considered the complex social dynamics she would be entering if she accepted Koru's offer. Every band had its hierarchies, its alliances and rivalries, its spoken and unspoken rules. Navigating these as an outsider would require all her intelligence and diplomatic skills. "Your band? How many?" she asked. 12 adults, 5 young ones, Koru replied. "Good size for hunting, gathering. Large enough to defend territory, small enough to move quickly when seasons change." It was indeed a good size, large enough to maintain genetic diversity and share the burdens of survival, but not so large as to require constant movement in search of resources. Nara's former band had numbered 15 before the drought, and the conflicts that followed tore them apart. The distant rumble of thunder drew both their gazes toward the approaching storm. The rain would bring relief from the heat and dust, but it would also make travel difficult and wash away the scent trails that predators used for hunting. If they were going to make a decision, it needed to be soon. "The stone," Nara said, nodding toward the crystal still in Koru's grasp. "What makes it special? Why offer such a thing for plant knowledge?" Koru's expression grew solemn as he held up the crystal, turning it so the stormlight caught its faceted surfaces. "Found it season after my female died. Dark time for me, dark time for band. I was by the river thinking of joining her in the beyond." He paused, his voice growing rough with remembered pain. Stone was there in water, catching light like captured sunlight. Seemed like message, reminder that beauty still exists, even in darkness. The admission of vulnerability surprised Nara. Most alpha males would never speak of such weakness, would never admit to considering abandoning their responsibilities to the band. This one's honesty was either a sign of unusual trust or dangerous naivety. "Since then, band has good fortune," Koru continued. "Successful hunts, healthy children, safe territory. Some say stone brings luck. I think maybe gives hope. Reminds us that even hardest times end like storms pass." Nara studied his weathered face, seeing in the deep lines and scars the story of a life spent struggling against the harsh realities of their world. He was offering her more than food or shelter or protection. He was offering her a place in something larger than individual survival, a chance to be part of a community bound together by shared purpose and mutual dependence. The first fat raindrops began to fall, dark spots appearing on the dusty ground around them. Soon the downpour would begin in earnest, and they would need to seek shelter. The moment of decision had arrived. The raindrops fell faster now, each one striking the parched earth with the promise of both relief and danger. Nara watched as the dust around her feet began to darken and clump, releasing the rich scent of moisture meeting drought-hardened soil. In the distance, lightning flickered between the mountainous clouds, followed by the low growl of thunder that seemed to echo from the very bones of the earth. Koru glanced toward his band's territory, where smoke from their fires would soon be scattered by the approaching storm. His people would be preparing for the downpour, securing their few precious possessions, digging drainage channels around their shelters, gathering the dried fuel that would be crucial for maintaining fire through the wet days ahead. "Come," he said, extending his hand toward a rocky outcropping that would provide some protection from the rain. "We speak more. Storm passes, then you decide." Nara hesitated only a moment before following him toward the natural shelter. The overhang was barely large enough for both of them, forcing them to sit closer than either had been to another person in moons. She could smell his scent now, not unpleasant, a mixture of wood smoke, dried sweat, and the musk that marked him as a healthy adult male of their species. As the rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the stone above their heads and sending sheets of water cascading past the entrance to their small refuge, Koru carefully placed the crystal on the ground between them. In the grey light of the storm, it seemed to glow with its own inner fire, each facet catching and reflecting what little illumination penetrated their shelter. "Tell me about your band," Nara said, settling herself against the rough stone wall. "The ones who might not welcome lone female." Koru was quiet for a long moment, organizing his thoughts as he watched the rain transform the landscape beyond their shelter. When he spoke, his words came carefully, weighted with the responsibility he felt toward both his people and the woman beside him. "Garko hunts with me. Good spear arm. Quick eyes, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "He sees threats everywhere. Lost mate to raiders 3 seasons past. Since then trusts no outsiders. Questions every decision that might bring change." Nara nodded. She had known males like Garko, scarred by loss. Their natural caution transformed into suspicious paranoia that could poison a band's unity if left unchecked. Such individuals were not inherently evil, but their fear could make them dangerous to anyone they perceived as a threat. Others? Jen and Kayla, younger males, strong, eager to prove themselves, sometimes challenge my decisions, think I grow too cautious with age. Koru's expression darkened slightly. They might see accepting you as weakness, attempt to use it against my leadership. The politics of band leadership were always precarious, Nara knew. An alpha male maintained his position through a combination of strength, wisdom, and the consent of the group. Any sign of weakness or poor judgment could trigger challenges that might result in violence, exile, or the dissolution of the band entirely. And if they challenge, Koru's hand moved unconsciously to the bone handle of his flint knife. Then we settle it as our people have always settled such disputes, but I prefer that it not come to that. Better to prove value of decision through results than through bloodshed. The rain intensified, turning the world beyond their shelter into a grey curtain of water that reduced visibility to mere arm's lengths. With it came the clean smell of washed air and the distant sound of what might have been a river beginning to swell with runoff from the mountains. Your knowledge, Koru continued, what makes it different from what Ulu knows? It was a fair question, and one that went to the heart of what Nara might offer his band. She chose her words carefully, not wanting to boast, but needing to establish her value. Ulu knows the old ways, yes? The plants and treatments passed down from mothers to daughters? At Koru's nod, she continued, I know those too, but also learned much during wandering seasons. Saw how other bands treat sickness. Learned from lone healers who traded knowledge for food and shelter. She gestured toward her scarred arms, each mark telling its own story of survival and learning. Each injury taught something new. Plants that grow only in certain seasons, roots that lose power if gathered at wrong time of day, combinations that work better than single herbs. Give example, Nara considered, then pointed to a wound on her forearm that had healed into a distinctive white scar. Cut from thorn began to fester. Ulu's knowledge would say clean with water, bind with soft leaves. But I learned, if you chew bitter bark first, spit juice into wound, then bind with leaves soaked in own water, healing comes faster. Scar less angry. Koru examined the scar she indicated, noting how clean and minimal it appeared, despite what must have been a serious wound. Bitter bark. From which tree? Depends on season, on where you are. Desert has different healing trees than forest. Mountains different from river valleys. Traveling alone teaches you to read land like others read faces. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape beyond their shelter, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very rock around them. The storm was directly overhead now, its fury unleashing the accumulated moisture of many cloudless days. My people need such knowledge, Koru admitted. We stay in same territory many seasons, know our plants well. But when seasons change, when we must move to follow game or find water, we struggle with unfamiliar plants, unfamiliar dangers. And if I share knowledge, then what? I become just another female in band, expected to gather roots and tend fires while males hunt. Koru met her gaze directly, his expression serious. You would be valued for knowledge, consulted on healing matters, given respect due to one who contributes to band's survival. Not same as other females, you choose your own path within band's needs. It was a significant promise, one that went against the traditional roles their species had evolved over countless generations. Nara studied Koru's face in the stormlight, trying to judge his sincerity and his ability to keep such a promise in the face of inevitable resistance from more traditional band members. Others accept this? That lone female makes own choices? Ulu will support it. She grows old, needs someone to carry on healing work. Better to share power while still strong than to lose knowledge when death comes. The crystal caught another flash of lightning, sending brief rainbows dancing across the stone walls of their shelter. As Nara watched the play of light, she found herself thinking not of the immediate decision before her, but of the longer path that had brought her to this moment, the choices and chances that had shaped her into someone capable of surviving alone in a world designed for group cooperation. The rain showed no signs of lessening, and night would come early with the storm clouds blocking the sun. Soon they would both need to make decisions about where to shelter, how to maintain warmth and safety through the long hours of darkness ahead. As the storm raged beyond their shelter, distant sounds began to penetrate the drumming of rain on stone. Nara's head tilted, her ears straining to separate the various noises carried on the wind. There, beneath the constant patter of water and the occasional rumble of thunder, voices calling through the downpour. Koru heard them too, his body tensing as he recognized the distinctive whooping calls of his hunter-gatherer band. The sounds were getting closer, multiple voices joining in the rhythmic pattern that served as both location beacon and reassurance of safety during dangerous weather. "They search for you," Nara observed, noting how Koru's expression shifted between relief and concern. "Should have returned before storm hit," he admitted. "Band worries when member stays away too long, especially during dangerous weather." He cupped his hands around his mouth and released his own call, a deep resonant sound that carried clearly despite the storm's interference. The approaching voices changed direction immediately, converging on their location with the efficiency of people who had spent lifetimes navigating by sound and scent. Within moments, dark figures emerged from the grey curtain of rain, their primitive clothing sodden and clinging to powerful frames as they jogged toward the rocky outcropping. Nara instinctively pressed herself deeper into the shadows of their shelter, every muscle ready for fight or flight. These were not her people, and the arrival of multiple strangers triggered ancient survival responses that months of solitude had honed to razor sharpness. The first to reach them was Gako, Koru's hunting partner. He was smaller than Koru, but wiry with muscle, his scarred face bearing the perpetual scowl of someone who expected betrayal from every shadow. His eyes fixed immediately on Nara, taking in her defensive posture and the fresh scent of the meat Koru had shared with her. "Found her," Gako said, his voice carrying a mix of suspicion and disapproval. "The lone one who watches our camp." His hand rested casually on the stone axe at his belt, ready to draw the weapon if the situation demanded violence. Behind Gako came two younger males, Jen and Kala, their faces bearing the eager aggression of hunters in their prime. They flanked the entrance to the shelter, effectively blocking any escape route while maintaining the pretense of casual positioning. "Koru," Jen spoke with barely concealed challenge in his voice. "Storm comes and you stay away from band to talk with stranger. This shows poor judgment for one who claims to lead hunts." Koru rose to his full height, and even in the cramped confines of the shelter, his presence seemed to fill the space. "I make decisions based on what is best for band, not on fear of new things," he replied, his tone carrying the authority that had kept him in leadership despite previous challenges. The tension between the males was palpable, generations of dominance patterns playing out in the subtle positioning of bodies and the careful modulation of voices. Nara recognized the dynamics. She had seen similar confrontations in her former band, had watched how quickly such moments could escalate into violence that tore communities apart. "What does lone female offer that is worth such risk?" Kayla asked, his younger voice attempting to match the authority of his elders. "What knowledge could be so valuable that alpha male abandons safety of band to sit with outcast in storm?" Before Koru could respond, Nara made a decision that surprised even herself. Rising to stand beside Koru, she fixed each of the younger males with a steady gaze that had intimidated predators and rivals alike during her seasons of solitude. "I offer knowledge that could save your children when sickness comes," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of rain. "Knowledge of plants that heal wounds your firekeeper cannot treat, roots that prevent the wasting sickness that takes the old and young when seasons turn harsh." Gako's scowl deepened. "Big words from outcast female. Easy to make claims when storm prevents testing of truth." "Test me now," Nara challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. She gestured toward Gako's left arm, where she could detect the subtle signs of an old injury that had never healed properly. "Your shoulder, injury from seasons past. Still brings pain when weather changes, still weakens your spear arm when you need strength most." Gako's eyes widened in shock, his hand moving involuntarily to the shoulder she had identified. "How do you—" "I see how you hold that arm, how you favor it without realizing," Nara continued. "Old break that set wrong, muscles that compensate until they ache in their turn. There are treatments, not cures, but ways to ease the pain, strengthen what can be strengthened." The silence that followed was broken only by the steady drumming of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Gako stared at her with a mixture of suspicion and unwilling interest, clearly torn between his distrust of outsiders and his desire for relief from chronic pain. Jen stepped forward, his young face twisted with skepticism. "Anyone could see old injuries, make guesses about pain. This proves nothing except that lone female watches others too closely." "Perhaps," Nara agreed, then turned her attention to Kala. "But watching closely also tells me that younger male there has been eating clay from riverbank to stop flux sickness that keeps him awake through the nights." Kayla's face flushed dark beneath his weathered skin, embarrassment and anger warring in his expression. The condition she had identified was deeply personal, the kind of ailment that young males preferred to hide rather than admit weakness to potential rivals. "You spy on our band," he accused, his voice rising with indignation. "I observe," Nara corrected calmly. "Same as you observe territory for signs of game, signs of danger. Difference is that I see signs of sickness, signs of need for healing that goes unmet." Koru watched the exchange with growing interest, recognizing the strategic intelligence behind Nara's responses. She was not simply demonstrating her knowledge, she was establishing her value while simultaneously showing that she posed no direct threat to the male's positions within the band hierarchy. "Clay helps with flux," Gakko admitted grudgingly, "but leaves stomach cramped, makes hunting difficult when need to stay near water. Better treatments exist," Nara assured him. "Bark tea that soothes without binding, root preparations that strengthen rather than merely stopping symptoms." The rain began to lessen slightly, though the sky remained dark with clouds that promised more storms before the night was through. In the growing quiet, another voice called from the distance, higher-pitched, distinctly female. "Ulu comes," Koru observed, relief evident in his tone. "She will want to meet the one who claims healing knowledge beyond her own." Ulu emerged from the rain like a spirit of the old times, her bent frame moving with surprising swiftness, despite the burden of many seasons. Her grey hair hung in wet strands around a face carved by decades of harsh living, but her eyes burned with an intelligence that age had sharpened rather than dimmed. She carried a staff made from the thigh bone of some great beast, using it as much for authority as for support. The younger males stepped aside respectfully as she approached, their earlier aggression tempered by the deference all members of the band showed to their eldest female. Ulu had been keeping fire and tending the sick since before any of them had drawn first breath, and her knowledge was considered sacred by their people. "So," Ulu said, her voice carrying the rasp of countless nights spent breathing smoke while tending flames, "this is the lone female who watches our band from the shadows." She studied Nara with eyes that missed nothing, taking in the scars, the muscle, the defensive posture that spoke of seasons lived without the protection of a group. Nara met the old woman's gaze steadily, recognizing in Ulu a kindred spirit, someone who had survived not through physical strength, but through accumulated wisdom and the respect that knowledge commanded. This would be her true test, not the posturing of suspicious males, but the evaluation of one healer by another. "I am called Nara," she said simply, offering the courtesy of her name without the submission that some might have expected from an outsider seeking acceptance. "Nara," Ulu repeated, tasting the syllables. "Strong name. Name for one who endures." She stepped closer, her ancient hands reaching toward Nara's arms to examine the scars there. "May I?" The request for permission, rather than the assumption of authority, impressed Nara. She extended her arms, allowing Ulu to trace the various marks with fingers that read flesh like others read tracks in mud. "This one," Ulu indicated a jagged scar near Nara's elbow, "from Stoneblade. Clean cut, healed well. You knew proper cleaning, proper binding." "Yes." "And this?" The old woman's finger found a circular mark on Nara's shoulder. "Burn, but strange pattern." "Plant juice," Nara explained. "Learned too late that certain leaves should not be crushed when skin is broken. Juice burns like fire, but burn itself heals without festering if treated properly." Ulu's eyebrows rose with interest. "Which plant?" "Three-leaf vine that grows on dead trees in wet valleys. Good for treating joint pain when used correctly, but dangerous if mishandled." "Ah," Ulu nodded slowly. "I know this plant, but did not know of burning property. Good learning, but costly teacher." The rain had softened to a gentle patter, though the sky remained heavy with the promise of more storms. In the relative quiet, Gakko shifted uncomfortably, his shoulder clearly paining him as Nara had predicted. The older woman noticed his movement immediately. "Your shoulder troubles you in this weather," she observed to Gakko, then turned back to Nara. "You claim to know treatments for old injuries that set poorly." "Not claims," Nara replied carefully. "Knowledge earned through necessity. When alone, every pain that interferes with hunting or gathering becomes matter of life or death. Must learn what works, what makes things worse." Ulu studied her for a long moment, then reached into the hide pouch she carried. From it, she withdrew a collection of dried plant materials, bark, roots, leaves that had been carefully preserved for their healing properties. She selected several pieces and held them out to Nara. "Tell me what you see." Nara examined the samples carefully, bringing each to her nose to detect subtle scents that would identify their properties. The first was easy: willow bark, common treatment for fever and pain. The second took longer, but she recognized the distinctive texture and aroma of a root that grew in marshy areas. The third was unfamiliar, clearly from a plant that did not grow in territories she had traveled. Willow bark for fever, pain, she said confidently. Marsh root for stomach troubles, especially the flux that comes from bad water or spoiled meat. She held up the third sample, admitting her limitation. This one is unknown to me, from plant that grows in different land than where I have wandered. Honest answer, Ulu approved. Many would guess rather than admit ignorance. This is bark from tree that grows in high mountains, used for breathing troubles when air grows thin. She took the samples back and selected others, creating an impromptu examination that tested not just Nara's knowledge, but her judgment and honesty. For each plant she could not identify, Nara admitted her ignorance, while describing similar treatments she had learned for the same conditions. Knowledge is like water, Ulu observed after testing several more samples. What works in one place may not work in another, but understanding of how body responds to treatment, this travels with healer wherever she goes. Gakko had been listening with growing interest, his skepticism gradually giving way to hope as the two women discussed treatments that might ease his chronic pain. Finally, he could contain his curiosity no longer. The shoulder pain. What treatment would you suggest? Nara considered carefully before responding. Would need to examine more closely, understand exactly how injury heals improperly, but generally, heat treatments to ease stiffness, certain exercises to strengthen muscles around injury, plant preparations to reduce swelling that comes with weather changes. Heat treatments? Hot stones wrapped in wet hides applied to painful areas, or heated sand in leather pouch. Heat helps muscles relax, improves flow of blood to injured areas. Ulu nodded approvingly. Good thinking. I have used heat for such troubles, but not systematically. Your methods? Learned from other healers? Some from others. Some discovered through trial and error, Nara admitted. When only one person to care for own injuries must try many approaches, remember what works. The old firekeeper was quiet for several heartbeats, weighing what she had learned against the needs of her band and the resistance she knew would come from some members. Finally, she turned to Koru. This one has knowledge worth learning, she said, her words carrying the authority of final judgment. Not all knowledge, not perfect knowledge, but honest knowledge tested by survival. Our band would benefit from what she offers. Jen stepped forward, his young face still twisted with skepticism. And what does she gain from sharing this knowledge? What does lone female truly want from our band? It was the question that lay at the heart of every alliance, every joining of outsider with the established group. Nara met the young male's challenging gaze directly, knowing that her answer would shape not just her immediate fate, but her position within the band if she were accepted. I want to live through coming seasons, she said, with simple honesty. Want to share knowledge that dies with me if I remain alone. Want to be part of something larger than daily struggle for survival. Pretty words, Kayla interjected. But what happens when band faces hard choices? When resources become scarce and difficult decisions must be made? Will lone female place band's needs above her own? The question struck to the core of group survival, touching on the fundamental loyalty that held hunter-gatherer bands together through the countless challenges they faced. Nara understood that her answer would be remembered and tested in times of crisis yet to come. The silence stretched between them as Nara considered Kala's challenge. Around them the storm continued its steady rhythm, but the immediate downpour had lessened enough that individual raindrops could be heard striking the stone surfaces of their shelter. In that relative quiet, her answer would carry the weight of covenant, a promise that would bind her to whatever fate awaited Koru's hunter-gatherer band. Hard choices, she repeated slowly, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Yes, I know hard choices. Watched my former band tear itself apart when resources grew scarce, when loyalty to individuals conflicted with survival of group. She gestured to the scars on her arms, each mark representing not just physical survival, but moral choices made under desperate circumstances. These marks, some from defending band's territory, some from sharing last food when others went hungry, some from mistakes made when trying to help those who could not be helped. Gakko shifted uncomfortably, his skepticism beginning to waver as he recognized something in Nara's tone that spoke of genuine loss rather than mere boasting. What happened to your former band? Ulu asked, her ancient voice gentle but insistent. As keeper of wisdom and memory, she understood that the past shaped the present in ways that could not be ignored. Nara was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain-soaked landscape as memories she had tried to bury surfaced with painful clarity. Drought came, lasted 2 full seasons, maybe more. Rivers dried to mud, then to cracked earth. Game moved beyond our territory, following water to distant lands. Her voice grew distant, lost in recollection. At first, we shared equally. Everyone ate when food was found. Everyone went hungry when hunting failed. But as dry seasons stretched on, some began hoarding, hiding water, keeping meat for their own families while others weakened. Natural response, Koru observed without judgment. When death approaches, instinct tells us to save ourselves. Our bloodkin. Yes, Nara agreed. Natural but deadly for band unity. Trust broke down. Accusations flew like spears in darkness. My mate, Thok, tried to hold group together through strength, through punishment of those who hoarded. But fear makes people desperate, and desperate people do terrible things. She paused, gathering strength to continue the painful narrative. Final break came, when Drak challenged Thok for leadership, claimed that Alpha's decisions doomed us all, that new ways were needed to survive. They fought and Thok won, but victory came at cost of wound that festered in heat, slowly poisoning his blood. The listeners remained silent, recognizing the universal tragedy of communities destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Each had lived through their own versions of such crises, had seen how quickly cooperation could transform into destructive competition. As Thok weakened and died, blame fell on me, Nara continued, her voice steady despite the pain of memory. Some said my healing knowledge should have saved him. Others whispered that I wanted him to die, that I sought power for myself. Truth mattered less than need for someone to blame. So you left, Jen said, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging understanding. Was driven out, Nara corrected. Given choice, leave alone or watch bands split into warring factions that would destroy everyone. I chose exile over civil war. Ulu reached out to touch Nara's shoulder, a gesture of comfort from one survivor to another. Hard choice. Wise choice, but hard. And now, Kayla pressed, still seeking the reassurance that his earlier challenge had demanded. If this band faces similar crisis, what choice would you make? Nara met his gaze directly, her answer carrying the conviction of hard-won wisdom. I would remember that no individual, not even skilled healer, is worth more than survival of group. If my presence caused division that threatened band's unity, I would leave before allowing history to repeat. But also, she added, her voice growing stronger, I would use knowledge gained from watching one band die to help prevent another from following same path. Would speak against hoarding, against placing individual survival above group cooperation. Would share all knowledge, all resources, all strength in service of common survival. Koru nodded slowly, recognizing in her words the wisdom that came only from experiencing the consequences of group failure. Experience teaches harsh lessons, but lessons that keep others alive. Experience also teaches how to recognize early signs of problems, Nara continued, how to address conflicts before they grow into mortal threats, how to maintain cooperation even when circumstances turn desperate. Gakko had been listening with growing interest, his hunter's mind grasping the tactical value of such knowledge. You would share these insights, teach others to see warning signs before crisis breaks band apart. Yes, prevention better than cure, whether treating disease or treating social sickness that destroys communities. The rain had finally stopped, though water continued to drip from the stone overhang above their heads. In the distance, shafts of sunlight began to pierce the storm clouds, painting the wet landscape in shades of gold and green that seemed almost impossibly vibrant after the grey monotony of the downpour. Ulu rose from her seated position with the careful movements of age, her staff clicking against stone as she prepared to make the pronouncement that everyone had been waiting for. As eldest female and keeper of the band's traditions, her word would carry decisive weight in determining Nara's fate. I have listened to words, observed behavior, tested knowledge, she said in her ceremonial voice. This one who calls herself Nara possesses skills our band needs, wisdom our band could benefit from, and honesty our band can trust. She turned to face Koru directly, acknowledging his leadership while making her own position clear. I counsel acceptance, not as charity to outcast, but as investment in band's future survival and prosperity. Jen and Carla exchanged glances, their earlier opposition wavering in the face of Ulu's endorsement. Even Gakko seemed to be reconsidering his suspicions, Drawn by the promise of relief from chronic pain and the practical value of Nara's survival experience, but the final decision rested with Koru, whose leadership would be tested by whatever choice he made. Accept Nara and risk internal division, reject her and lose valuable knowledge, while potentially insulting Ulu's judgment. Either path carried dangers that could reshape the band's future. Koru reached for the crystal he had placed between them hours earlier, its faceted surface now catching the first rays of sunlight that penetrated their shelter. The stone seemed to pulse with inner fire, reminding all present of the hopes and promises it represented. "The choice must be made," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of leadership and the acceptance of whatever consequences would follow. Koru lifted the crystal, watching as the emerging sunlight transformed it into a prism of dancing colors. The stone had become more than a simple trade offering. It had evolved into a symbol of the choice that would define not just Nara's future, but the direction of his entire hunter-gatherer band. "Seasons ago, when I found this stone, I was lost in grief and doubt," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the post-storm quiet. "Seemed like sign then, reminder that beauty and hope could exist, even in darkest times." He looked directly at Nara, weighing his words carefully. "Today I see another sign. Lone female who survives impossible odds, who offers knowledge our band needs, who speaks truth even when truth is painful." Gakko shifted uncomfortably, his practical nature warring with lingering suspicions. "Signs can deceive, Koru. Stones are just stones, regardless of how light catches them." "Perhaps," Koru acknowledged, "but survival requires more than practical knowledge, requires hope, requires belief that tomorrow can be better than today." He extended the crystal toward Nara, its faceted surface throwing rainbows across her weathered features. "I offer this not as payment for plant knowledge, but as symbol of place in our band, of trust given and trust expected in return." Nara stared at the offered stone, understanding that accepting it meant accepting far more than a beautiful ornament. This was a covenant, a binding agreement that would tie her fate to that of Koru's people through whatever trials lay ahead. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward the crystal, decades of solitary survival, making the commitment to group loyalty feel both foreign and terrifying. "And others?" she asked, not yet touching the stone. "Will all accept this decision, or will some wait for first opportunity to drive out unwelcome addition?" It was Jen who answered, surprising everyone with the maturity of his response. "Ulu speaks wisdom, Koru shows leadership, and you," he paused, struggling with pride that warred against growing respect, "you show honesty that many would lack. If you prove as useful as claimed, opposition will fade. If not," he shrugged, leaving the implied threat unspoken but understood. "Fair words," Nara acknowledged. She looked around the small group, reading the faces that would become her daily reality if she accepted Koru's offer. Ulu showed quiet approval, her ancient wisdom recognizing the value of the bargain being struck. Gakko remained skeptical, but seemed willing to give her a chance to prove herself. The younger males carried the wariness of youth, but not the bitter hostility she had feared. "I accept," she said simply, closing her fingers around the crystal. The stone felt warm against her palm, whether from absorbed sunlight or some deeper property she could not say. "I accept place in your band, responsibility to contribute to common survival, obligation to put group welfare above individual desires." Koru's shoulders relaxed visibly, tension he had carried throughout the negotiation finally releasing. "Then it is decided. We return to camp, introduce you properly to others, find you shelter and position within band structure." As they prepared to leave the rocky outcropping that had sheltered their momentous conversation, Ulu approached Nara with the slow, deliberate movements of one who had something important to convey. "The real test comes now," the old woman said quietly, her voice meant for Nara's ears alone. "Accepting outsider is easy decision compared to integrating outsider into daily life. There will be challenges, conflicts over gathering territories, disputes about treatment methods, jealousies and resentments that grow in darkness." Nara nodded, appreciating the warning and the wisdom behind it. "What advice do you offer? Be patient with those who test you, but firm in your knowledge. Share freely, but do not try to change everything at once. Most important, remember that you are no longer alone, but also remember that belonging to group means group belongs to you. Their survival becomes your survival. Their children become your concern." The weight of that responsibility settled on Nara's shoulders like a heavy hide cloak. For seasons, her only obligation had been to herself, her only concern her individual survival. Now she would be responsible not just for her own welfare, but for contributing to the survival and prosperity of 17 other souls, men, women, and children, whose lives would be affected by her decisions and actions. The group began making their way down from the rocky outcropping, following paths made treacherous by the recent rain. Their movements had the coordinated efficiency of people who had traveled together for many seasons, each automatically taking positions that provided mutual protection and support during the hazardous descent. Nara found herself walking beside Gakko, the scarred hunter's skepticism still evident, but tempered by curiosity about the treatment she had promised for his shoulder pain. As they navigated a particularly steep section of the path, he spoke without looking at her directly. "The heat treatments you mentioned, how long before they show effect?" "Depends on severity of old injury. How long since it happened?" Nara replied, grateful for the opening to demonstrate her knowledge in practical terms. "Some relief comes immediately from muscle relaxation. Longer-term improvement takes time, many treatments over many days. And the plant preparations? Those also take time to show full benefit. But unlike heat, which only provides temporary relief, right plant treatments can reduce inflammation that causes ongoing pain." They walked in companionable silence for a while, picking their way carefully over rain-slick stones and muddy patches that could turn treacherous without warning. Around them, the landscape sparkled with renewed life as plants and animals emerged from their storm shelters to take advantage of the precious moisture. "There," Koru said, pointing toward a distant column of smoke that rose steadily into the clearing sky. "Our fires survived the storm. Good sign. Means others prepared properly, maintained flames through the worst weather." As they drew closer to the camp, Nara could make out the shapes of crude shelters arranged around several fire pits. The structures were temporary but well-designed, frameworks of bones and branches covered with carefully tanned hides that could shed rain while retaining heat. Smoke rose from multiple locations, indicating that the band had maintained not just cooking fires, but also the sacred flames that provided light, warmth, and protection from predators during the dangerous night hours. Figures moved among the shelters, adults engaged in the countless tasks necessary for group survival, children playing despite the recent storm, elders tending fires and preparing for evening activities. It was a scene of organized cooperation that tugged at something deep in Nara's chest, awakening memories of community life that her seasons of solitude had forced her to suppress. "They will stare," Ulu warned gently. "Not from hostility, but from curiosity. New people are rare in our world, especially lone females who survive without band protection." Nara straightened her shoulders, preparing herself for the scrutiny that would determine her acceptance or rejection by the broader community. The crystal in her hand caught the light once more, reminding her of the promises made and the responsibilities accepted. Her new life was about to begin. The camp fell silent as Koru's group approached, every activity ceasing as the band members took notice of the stranger, walking among their familiar number. Nara felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, studying her scars, her posture, the way she carried herself with the confident wariness of one accustomed to facing danger alone. A woman emerged from the largest shelter, her movements swift and purposeful, despite the burden of a small child clinging to her hip. This had to be Mira, the gathering leader Koru had mentioned, young but fierce, with the lean build of someone who spent her days ranging far from camp in search of edible plants and useful materials. Her dark eyes fixed on Nara with an intensity that bordered on hostility. "So this is the Watcher," Mira said, her voice carrying clearly across the camp. "The lone female who skulks in our territory like a scavenger waiting for scraps." The child on her hip, a boy of perhaps 3 seasons, stared at Nara with the frank curiosity of youth, apparently unbothered by the tension crackling between the adults. This must be Bok, the one who had fallen ill from eating dangerous berries. "I am Nara," she replied simply, meeting Mira's challenging gaze without flinching. "I come seeking place in your band, offering knowledge and skills in exchange for shelter and community." "Seeking or demanding?" Mira shot back. "You watch us for days like predators stalking prey, then appear with pretty words about knowledge and healing. What proof do we have that lone female offers anything more than additional mouth to feed during lean times?" Before Nara could respond, other band members began emerging from their shelters and gathering around the growing confrontation. She recognized some faces from her distant observations. an older man with graying hair and clever hands that marked him as the band's toolmaker. Several women of various ages who likely formed the core of the gathering teams, younger males who hung back with the deference due to their elders, but watched every exchange with keen interest. Ulu stepped forward, her ancient authority commanding immediate respect. "Peace, Mira. Questions deserve answers, but hostility serves no purpose." She gestured toward a clear space near the central fire pit. "Let all gather, hear what has been decided. Judge for themselves the wisdom of accepting new member." The band arranged themselves in a rough circle, the spatial arrangement automatically reflecting their internal hierarchy. Koru took his position as hunt leader, with Ulu at his side representing the wisdom of age and tradition. Mira positioned herself directly across from them, her role as gathering leader, giving her equal voice in matters affecting the band's welfare. The other adults filled the remaining spaces according to their status and relationships, while children clustered near their parents but remained alert to the proceedings. Gakko moved to stand beside Nara, his presence serving as implicit endorsement of her acceptance. The gesture surprised her. She had expected him to remain neutral at best given his earlier skepticism. Perhaps their conversation about treatments for his shoulder pain had carried more weight than she had realized. "Speak," Koru said formally, addressing the assembled band. "Tell them what knowledge you offer, what place you seek among us." Nara took a deep breath, understanding that this moment would determine her future more surely than any individual conversation or test. These people would become her family, her protection, her reason for living, or they would reject her, sending her back into the deadly solitude that had nearly claimed her life multiple times already. "I offer healing knowledge learned through seasons of survival alone," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Knowledge of plants that grow in many territories, treatments for injuries and sickness that your current healer may not know, experience gained from traveling through different lands and learning from other healers." She gestured toward Gakko, who nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "Already I have identified old injuries that cause ongoing pain, suggested treatments that could provide relief where none existed before." "Pretty words," Mira interjected, bouncing her restless child to keep him quiet. "But words cost nothing. What happens when real test comes, when resources grow scarce and hard choices must be made? Will lone female place band's needs above her own comfort?" It was the same challenge that had been raised during their shelter discussion, but now it carried additional weight in front of the entire band. Nara understood that her answer would be remembered and measured against future actions, becoming part of the foundation upon which her acceptance would be built. "I watched my former band destroy itself when drought came and cooperation failed," she said, her voice heavy with remembered pain. "Saw how quickly trust breaks down when individuals place personal survival above group welfare. Learned that no one survives alone for long, that even strongest person needs community to thrive." She looked around the circle, meeting each gaze that would hold hers. "I offer not just healing knowledge, but experience of what happens when band unity fails, knowledge of early warning signs that precede such failures, understanding of how to maintain cooperation even during desperate times." The toolmaker, introduced earlier as Rak, leaned forward with interest. "You speak of other territories, other bands. What did you see in your wanderings? What threats should we prepare for?" It was a perceptive question, one that went beyond individual skills to consider the broader context of survival in their dangerous world. Nara appreciated the opportunity to demonstrate the strategic value of her experience. "Raiders moving south from mountain territories, following game herds as they migrate with changing seasons," she replied. "Bands displaced by drought seeking new territories, willing to fight for resources. New sickness spreading along trade routes, fever that kills strong adults, leaves children orphaned." A murmur ran through the assembled band as members digested this intelligence. Such information could mean the difference between preparation and catastrophe, between survival and destruction, if threats materialized in their territory. "These raiders," Koru asked, his leadership instincts engaging with the tactical implications. "How many? How well armed? What are their movement patterns?" Group Y observed numbered perhaps 20 adults, well equipped with stone weapons and knowledge of coordinated hunting techniques, Nara responded. "They move quickly, strike targets of opportunity, avoid prolonged engagements with prepared defenders." She paused, ensuring she had everyone's attention before continuing. "But they also showed signs of poor band discipline, arguing among themselves, failing to post proper sentries, making unnecessary noise during travel. Dangerous because of numbers and weapons, but vulnerable because of poor organization. Mira had been listening with growing interest, her gathering leader's mind grasping the importance of such intelligence for territorial planning. The sickness you mentioned. What symptoms? How does it spread? High fever lasting many days, weakness that persists even after fever breaks, Nara replied. Spreads quickly through bands that gather in large numbers, seems to pass from person to person through breath or touch. Seen 3 different bands affected, all losing significant numbers before survivors learned to isolate sick individuals. The circle fell silent as band members considered the implications of facing such a plague. Disease was always a terror for their people, capable of destroying entire communities within days or weeks. Knowledge of symptoms and prevention methods could prove more valuable than any amount of healing skill applied after infection had already taken hold. Young Bok began to fuss in his mother's arms, tired of remaining still during the adult conversation. Mira shifted him to her other hip, but his complaints continued to grow louder, threatening to disrupt the formal proceedings. Without conscious thought, Nara reached into her hide pouch and withdrew a small piece of honeycomb she had been saving for emergencies. The sweet treasure was precious beyond measure, worth considerable hardship to obtain, but she offered it to the child without hesitation. Bok's eyes widened at the sight of the golden treat, his complaints immediately forgotten in favor of eager reaching toward the unexpected gift. Mira's expression softened slightly as she watched her son's delight, recognizing the generosity inherent in sharing such a valuable resource with another's child. "Thank you," she said quietly, the first words she had spoken to Nara without hostility or challenge. As darkness settled over the camp, the band's fires took on new significance, beacons of warmth and safety in a world where nightfall brought countless dangers. Nara found herself sitting between Ulu and a younger woman named Kira, their positions in the circle reflecting her tentative acceptance into the group's social structure. The formal discussions had concluded with a consensus to grant her a trial period, a practical solution that allowed both sides to evaluate the wisdom of permanent acceptance. She would contribute her skills to the band's welfare while learning their customs and proving her commitment to group survival. In return, they would provide shelter, protection, and the invaluable security that came from being part of a functioning community. Mira had surprised everyone by offering to share her shelter with Nara during the trial period. "Easier to judge character when sharing close quarters," she had explained pragmatically. "And if lone female proves useful, my son could benefit from additional protection and knowledge." Now, as the evening meal was distributed and consumed around the fires, Nara began to understand the complex web of relationships that held the band together. Conversations flowed in the abbreviated language of their people, but the underlying emotions and connections required no translation. Gakko sat nearby, occasionally rolling his injured shoulder and wincing as old pain flared with the evening's cooling temperatures. True to her word, Nara had gathered hot stones from the fire's edge and wrapped them in dampened hides, creating the heat treatments she had promised during their earlier discussion. "Press firmly against the pain," she instructed, helping him position the warm compress correctly. "Hold for time it takes sun to move width of thumb across sky, then remove for same period. Repeat until stones grow cold." The relief on Gakko's weathered face was immediate and obvious, his chronic tension easing as heat penetrated deep into damaged muscle and bone. Around the fire, other band members watched the treatment with keen interest, several displaying their own old injuries that might benefit from similar attention. "How did you learn this?" asked Tern, a middle-aged woman whose right hand showed the gnarled scars of poorly healed breaks. "Our healers speak of plant medicines, but not of heat as treatment." "Necessity," Nara replied honestly. "When alone with injured shoulder during cold season, tried everything to ease pain enough to hunt effectively. Firestones worked better than any plant preparation for deep muscle pain." She looked around the circle of interested faces, seeing not skepticism now, but genuine curiosity about techniques that could improve their lives. "Many treatments combine well. Heat to relax muscles, then plant preparations to reduce swelling, then careful exercises to strengthen weakened areas." Ulu nodded approvingly from her position of honor near the central fire. "Wisdom builds upon wisdom. New knowledge does not replace old knowledge but adds to it, creating stronger understanding." As the evening progressed, children who had initially stared at Nara with wary curiosity began to venture closer, drawn by her calm manner and the fascinating scars that decorated her arms and legs. Young Bok was particularly bold, having already established a connection through the shared honeycomb earlier. "This one?" he asked, pointing to a distinctive circular scar on her forearm. "How happen?" Nara smiled at his directness, remembering her own childhood fascination with the stories that adult scars represented. Snakebite. Very poisonous snake. Bite could kill in short time. The children's eyes widened with delighted horror, and several adults leaned closer to hear the tale. Stories were precious entertainment in their world, serving both to educate and to strengthen the bonds that held communities together. "Was gathering roots near river when snake struck," Nara continued, unconsciously falling into the rhythmic cadence of traditional storytelling. "Felt fire race up arm. Knew death might come quickly if poison reached heart." She traced the scar with one finger, reliving the desperate moments that had followed the attack. Cut around bite immediately, tried to draw poison out with mouth, then packed wound with mud from riverbank, certain clay that draws poison from flesh. "Dangerous," Kira observed with a shudder. "River clay often contains evil spirits that cause infection." "Yes, dangerous," Nara agreed. "But poison death comes faster than infection death. Had to choose lesser danger over greater danger." The story continued with her desperate journey to find the specific plants needed to counteract the venom, her growing weakness as the poison spread through her system, and the final desperate gamble that had saved her life but left her unconscious for many days beside a small water source. "Woke to find wild dogs had been guarding my body," she concluded. "Never understood why they protected instead of eating, but grateful for protection during helpless time." The story ended to appreciative murmurs and requests for more tales from her seasons of solitude. Nara realized that her experiences, painful as they had been to live through, were treasure troves of entertainment and education for people whose lives rarely took them beyond familiar territory. As the night deepened and younger children were sent to sleep in the shelters, the adult conversation turned to more serious matters. Koru produced a crude map scratched on a piece of bark, marking territories, water sources, and seasonal migration routes that defined their world. "Show us," he requested, offering Nara a pointed stick to add her own observations to the primitive chart. "Mark where you have traveled, where dangers were encountered, where resources might be found." Nara studied the map carefully, orienting herself within the geographical knowledge it represented. Then she began adding marks and symbols, each representing information that could prove crucial to the band's survival. "Raiders last seen here," she said, marking a position near the mountains. "Moving south along this river valley, following deer herds toward winter grounds." She added more marks, water sources she had discovered during her wanderings, territories where certain valuable plants grew in abundance, areas where other bands had established seasonal camps that should be avoided to prevent conflicts. "This knowledge," Rack the toolmaker observed, studying her additions to their map, "worth more than any single skill or trade item. Maps of safe paths, dangerous areas, these keep entire bands alive during difficult seasons." The conversation continued late into the night, covering topics that ranged from immediate practical concerns to longer-term strategic planning. Nara found herself contributing not just her specific knowledge, but her broader perspective, the viewpoint of someone who had observed their world from outside the comfortable assumptions of established community life. When the fires finally began to die down and band members started retiring to their shelters, Mira approached Nara with an expression that mixed wariness with reluctant respect. "Your knowledge proves useful," she admitted grudgingly, "and your gift to my son shows understanding of proper behavior toward children." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Trial period begins tomorrow. Work hard, cause no trouble, and perhaps lone female finds permanent home among us." As Nara settled into the corner of Mira's shelter that had been designated as her space, she clutched the crystal Koru had given her and reflected on the dramatic changes a single day had brought to her life. For the first time in countless seasons, she fell asleep surrounded by the sounds of other people breathing, protected by sentries who watched for dangers that threatened the group rather than just herself. The loneliness that had been her constant companion was finally beginning to fade. The morning sun found Nara awake before dawn, her ingrained habits of solitary survival making sleep beyond the first grey light impossible. Around her, the shelter held the quiet breathing of Mira and her children, the peaceful sounds of people who slept secure in the knowledge that others stood watch against the night's dangers. Outside, the camp was beginning to stir. She could hear the soft voices of the fire tenders, adding fuel to flames that had burned low during the night hours, the quiet movements of early risers preparing for the day's activities. The routine sounds of community life filled her with a contentment she had forgotten could exist. Mira stirred as Nara carefully rose from her sleeping furs, the gathering leader's instincts alert even in sleep to movements within her territory. "Early riser," she observed without hostility, noting how Nara had managed to rise without disturbing the children. "Old habits," Nara replied quietly. "Alone, dawn brings both opportunity and danger. Better to greet day prepared than to be caught sleeping by threats. Wise practice even in band camp," Mira acknowledged, sitting up and beginning the process of waking her children for the day ahead. "Today you learn our gathering methods. See if lone female's knowledge fits with our territory and our needs." It was the first practical test of her integration into band life, and both women understood its importance. Gathering provided the majority of the band's nutritional needs, supplementing the meat from hunting with the plants, roots, and other materials that ensured balanced survival. If Nara's knowledge proved incompatible with their established methods, or if her presence disrupted the careful teamwork that made gathering efficient, her trial period might end before it truly began. After a simple breakfast of dried meat and early berries, the gathering team assembled near the camp's edge. Besides Mira and Nara, the group included Kira, Tern, and 2 other women, whose names Nara was still learning. Each carried a woven basket and the essential tools of their trade: digging sticks hardened in fire, cutting implements made from sharp stones, and small pouches for seeds and other tiny treasures. "We work different areas in rotation," Mira explained, as they set out toward the day's chosen territory. "Prevents over-harvesting, allows plants time to recover between visits. Today we check the valley grove where nut trees should be dropping early fruits." The walk to the gathering area gave Nara her first real chance to observe the team's methods in their natural environment. The women moved with practiced efficiency, their eyes constantly scanning for useful materials while maintaining awareness of potential dangers. Conversations were kept quiet but informative, sharing observations about plant conditions, weather effects, and signs of animal activity that might indicate either opportunity or threat. "There," Kira pointed toward a cluster of bushes, heavy with dark berries. "Early harvest, but some look ready." The team dispersed around the berry patch with the fluid coordination of long practice, each woman taking a section that maximized efficiency while preventing the accidental trampling that could damage future harvests. Their technique impressed Nara. She had gathered alone for so long that she had forgotten the advantages of coordinated effort. As she worked alongside Tern, Nara noticed that many of the berries the women were collecting showed signs of insect damage or overripeness that would make them less nutritious and more likely to spoil quickly. Her training had taught her to be more selective, choosing only the finest specimens for consumption while using damaged fruits for other purposes. "These ones," she said quietly to Tern, indicating a cluster of berries that appeared perfect but showed subtle signs of fungal infection. "Look good but carry sickness inside, will taste bitter, might cause stomach trouble." Tern examined the berries more closely, noting the barely visible discoloration that Nara had identified. "How do you know? They look healthy to my eyes." "Small differences in color, texture. Learn to recognize when single bad berry could mean several days of sickness with no one else to care for me." Nara showed Tern the subtle signs: a slight dulling of the skin, a texture that was too soft for the berry's apparent ripeness, a smell that was almost but not quite right. "Useful knowledge," Tern admitted, beginning to sort through her own collection to remove potentially problematic specimens. "We sometimes have stomach troubles after gathering trips, never understood why." Word of Nara's berry identification skills spread quickly through the team, and soon all the women were asking her to inspect their collections. Far from being annoyed by the interruption to their routine, they seemed genuinely interested in learning techniques that could improve their effectiveness. The nut grove proved even more rewarding. The trees were indeed dropping their early harvest, carpeting the ground with a bounty that would provide essential nutrition through the coming seasons. But here again, Nara's solitary experience proved valuable in ways she had not expected. "Fresh nuts from tree good for eating now," she observed, watching the women collect fallen fruits indiscriminately. "But nuts on ground more than few days begin to change inside. Still good, but need different treatment for long storage." She showed them how to sort the nuts by age and condition, the freshest ones set aside for immediate consumption, slightly older ones prepared for short-term storage, and the oldest ones processed differently to extract oils that would not spoil even over. long periods. Never thought to sort so carefully, Mira admitted, examining her own collection with new understanding. We lose many nuts to spoilage during storage, never knew why some lasted and others turned bad. As the day progressed, Nara's value to the gathering team became increasingly apparent. Her knowledge extended beyond simple plant identification to encompass the subtle understanding of timing, processing, and storage that could significantly increase the nutritional value the band extracted from their environment. But more than technical knowledge, she brought a different perspective shaped by seasons of individual responsibility for every aspect of survival. Where the team had developed efficient routines for known resources, she had learned to extract maximum value from every opportunity, waste nothing that could contribute to survival, and recognize subtle signs that indicated changes in plant behavior or availability. The root vegetables near stream, she mentioned during their midday rest, showing signs of early drought stress. If we harvest them now before stress becomes severe, they will be more nutritious and store better than if we wait for normal harvest time. Mira studied the distant plants Nara indicated, noting details she had not observed during their previous visits to this area. You see things we miss. Why? When alone, missing important signs means hunger, sickness, maybe death, Nara replied simply. Attention to small details becomes habit necessary for survival. The afternoon brought an unexpected test, when young Bok, who had been playing at the edge of the gathering area while his mother worked, suddenly cried out in pain. The women rushed to find him clutching his hand, tears streaming down his face as he tried to pull thorns from his palm. Grabbed wrong plant, he sobbed, holding up his injured hand for inspection. Hurts much? Nara knelt beside the boy, gently examining the wounds while speaking in the calm, reassuring voice she had learned to use with frightened animals. Show me the plant you touched, little hunter. Need to know which thorns we are fighting. Bok led her to a flowering bush whose beautiful blooms concealed vicious barbs designed to protect the plant from browsing animals. The thorns were deeply embedded in his palm, and several had broken off beneath the skin, where they could cause ongoing pain and infection. Hold very still, Nara instructed, producing a thin bone needle from her kit. Going to remove thorns so hand can heal properly. Working with the precision born of treating her own injuries in far more dangerous circumstances, she carefully extracted each thorn, while Mira held her son steady. The process was painful but necessary, and Bok bore it with the stoicism expected of children in their harsh world. Now comes healing part, Nara said, reaching for specific plants she had noticed during their gathering. She selected leaves from 3 different sources, chewing them briefly to release their medicinal properties, before applying the resulting paste to Bok's wounds. What are those? Kira asked, watching the treatment with professional interest. This one reduces pain. This one prevents infection. This one helps wounds close cleanly, Nara explained, wrapping Bok's hand with soft leaves that would hold the medicine in place. Different plants work together better than any single plant alone. Within minutes, the boy's tears stopped as the pain-relieving properties took effect. His normal, cheerful demeanor returned, though he remained properly subdued by the experience of serious injury. Thank you, Mira said quietly, her earlier reservations about Nara clearly dissolving in the face of practical demonstration of healing skills. Bok's injuries always worry me. Children take risks that adults know to avoid. As the gathering team prepared to return to camp with their day's harvest, Nara realized that she had passed more than just a simple test of compatibility. She had demonstrated not only knowledge and skills, but also the judgment and character that would make her a valuable long-term member of the band. The sun was beginning to set as they walked back toward the distant smoke of cooking fires, their baskets heavy with the fruits of successful cooperation. 3 moons had passed since the storm that brought Nara to Koru's band, and the autumn air carried the crisp promise of seasonal change. The trial period that had begun with cautious acceptance had evolved into genuine integration, her knowledge and skills proving valuable in ways none of them had fully anticipated. She sat now beside the evening fire, applying heated stone treatments to Rak's arthritic joints, while simultaneously instructing Kira in the proper preparation of winter medicines. The multitasking had become second nature, her healing abilities allowing her to serve multiple band members, while teaching others to carry on the work when she was not available. Press the willow bark between 2 stones until juice flows, she explained to Kira, monitoring the younger woman's technique. Too much pressure bruises the healing properties, too little fails to release them properly. Around the fire, other band members pursued their own evening activities, with the peaceful efficiency of a well-functioning community. Children played quiet games under adult supervision. Hunters maintained their weapons and planned the next day's activities. Gatherers sorted and prepared the day's harvest for storage against winter's coming scarcity. Garko approached the fire with his characteristic rolling gait, his injured shoulder moving more freely than it had in seasons thanks to Nara's ongoing treatments. "The shoulder pain is almost gone," he reported, settling beside her with obvious gratitude. "First time in many seasons that changing weather does not bring agony." "Healing takes time," Nara replied, adjusting the heated stones on Rack's swollen joints. "But consistent treatment allows body to repair damage that seemed permanent." It was a lesson that applied to more than physical injuries, she reflected. Her own integration into the band had required the same patient consistency, gradually building trust and understanding through daily demonstrations of value and commitment to group welfare. Young Bok rushed up to the fire with the boundless energy of childhood, his formerly injured hand now completely healed and forgotten. "Nara, Mother says you will teach me about healing plants tomorrow. Will show me how to find good berries like you showed gathering team." "If your mother permits and you promise to listen carefully to instructions," Nara agreed, ruffling his hair with genuine affection. The boy had become particularly attached to her, perhaps sensing in her solitary strength something that resonated with his own independent spirit. Mira emerged from her shelter carrying the evening's mending, settling into the circle with the comfortable assumption of belonging that had replaced her initial hostility. Bok speaks truth. Time he learned proper plant knowledge, and better to learn from expert teacher than to make dangerous mistakes through ignorance. The acceptance implicit in her words filled Nara with quiet satisfaction. Mira's approval had been the hardest to earn, but also the most meaningful. The gathering leader's endorsement carried significant weight within the band's social structure. Koru joined the fire circle as the last light faded from the western sky, his presence immediately commanding attention despite the casual nature of his approach. As hunt leader, his decisions affected every aspect of band survival, and his evening reports were always listened to with keen interest. "Scouts report large deer herd moving through valley 2 days south," he announced, settling into his traditional position near the fire's heart. "Good hunting opportunity, but will require most adult males for several days. Dangerous time to leave camp with reduced protection." It was the kind of decision that tested leadership, the need to balance opportunity against risk, immediate benefit against longer-term security. Nara listened with the attention such decisions deserved, understanding that her opinion might now carry weight in considerations that affected everyone's survival. "What dangers concern you most?" Ulu asked. Her ancient wisdom focused on identifying specific threats rather than general anxieties. "Raiders still moving through region, though further east than last reports indicated," Koru replied. "Also signs of large predator pack in hunting area. Wolves or wild dogs that might contest our kills or threaten hunting party." Nara considered the information, weighing it against her own observations and the intelligence she had gathered during recent gathering expeditions. The predator signs. How fresh. Wolves avoid areas with strong human presence, but wild dogs sometimes follow hunting parties to scavenge kills. "Signs were 2 days old when found, moving north toward mountain passes," Koru responded. "Could be gone from area by time we arrive, but could also be circling back following scent of deer herd. Manageable risk if hunting party remains alert and prepared," Nara judged. "Wild dogs dangerous to individuals but avoid confronting organized groups. Wolves more dangerous but less likely to linger in area with heavy human activity." The discussion continued for some time, weighing various factors and considerations that would influence the final decision. Nara found herself contributing not just her knowledge of predator behavior, but her broader understanding of risk assessment, developed through seasons of making life-or-death choices with incomplete information. As the fire burned lower and the conversation moved to other topics, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since that rainy day when Koru had offered her a shining stone in exchange for food and companionship. The solitary existence that had once defined her seemed like a half-remembered dream, replaced by the complex web of relationships and responsibilities that characterized community life. "The crystal," Bok said suddenly, his child's mind making connections that adults often missed. "The pretty stone Koru gave you? Do you still have it?" Nara reached into her pouch and withdrew the faceted gem, its surface still catching and reflecting firelight in dancing patterns that mesmerized the watching children. The stone had become more than a gift or trade token. It served as a tangible reminder of the choice that had transformed her life. "Still pretty," Bock observed with the directness of youth. "Still brings good luck to band?" "Good luck comes from good decisions and hard work," Koru replied diplomatically. "But perhaps stone reminds us that beauty and hope exist even in difficult times." Nara studied the crystal's dancing reflections, remembering the desperate circumstances that had led her to accept Koru's offer. The woman who had made that choice seemed like a stranger now, driven by hunger and loneliness, to gamble everything on the possibility of acceptance by people who had no reason to trust her. "The choice was right," she said quietly, speaking to the crystal, but meaning her words for everyone around the fire. "Difficult, frightening, but right. Sometimes survival requires taking risks that go beyond simple safety. And sometimes," Mira added with unexpected warmth, "taking such risks brings rewards beyond what anyone could have imagined." The fire crackled and settled, as if emphasizing her words, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled darkness above. Around the circle, band members began the evening's final preparations, banking coals that would preserve fire through the night, checking on sleeping children, organizing materials needed for tomorrow's activities. Nara remained by the dying fire long after the others had retired to their shelters, holding the crystal up to catch the last flickering reflections. The stone's beauty remained unchanged, but everything else about her existence had been transformed by the choice to accept Koru's offer. She was no longer alone, no longer driven by the desperate need to survive each day without thought for tomorrow. No longer isolated from the connections and relationships that gave life meaning beyond mere existence. The crystal caught one final glint of firelight before darkness claimed the camp, but Nara no longer needed its beauty to remind her that hope could survive even the harshest circumstances. She had found her place among Koru's people, earned her position through demonstrated value and genuine commitment to their shared survival. The choice had been made that night during the storm, but its consequences continued to unfold with each passing day. As she finally made her way to the shelter she now truly called home, Nara smiled at the thought that the best decisions often revealed their wisdom slowly, through the accumulated evidence of days lived well and choices proven sound by the test of time. Her solitary wandering was over. Her real life, the life lived in connection with others who had become family, was just beginning.